Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking with Kyle Ramos of the Slightly Sophisticated Podcast. Kyle's podcast covers news and politics in a slightly sophisticated way. His podcast is a politically correct free zone that will look for the truth no matter where it comes from, left or right. This recorded conversation can also be found on the Slightly Sophisticated Podcast channel. We recorded this conversation about a week ago, and I wasn't able to release anything due to the busy work and content schedule I'm on currently. But better late than never. We actually recorded this about a half an hour after the breaking news of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's passing. We talk a little bit about that and other political topics like what is wrong with the current-day Democrat and Republican parties. This conversation was about an hour and a half long, so there'll be no bonus content at the end, but I'd still appreciate you joining and subscribing to the Engineering Politics Locals community. You can go to engineeringpolitics.locals.com and become a member for free, or get the subscriber pass for as little as $2 per month. You can use promo code EPFREE for a 3-month free trial of the subscriber pass, that's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I'll go over more of where you can find me and support this content after the show. Also, make sure to show some support for Kyle from the Slightly Sophisticated Podcast. Make sure to give his other podcast episodes a listen. You can find the Slightly Sophisticated Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. So go check them out. All right, let's get this started. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Today, I'm joined by Kevin from the Engineering Politics Podcast. You know what? Kevin, thank you for being here, and give everybody a little background.
So my name is Kevin. I run a website and community and YouTube community and videos and podcasts under the Engineering Politics name. What I do there is I'm a conservative content writer. So I started out at least writing about conservative principles, a lot in economics, because my background is none of these things. I'm actually an engineer. That's why engineering's in the name. Pretty clever. But in reality, I was just interested in these things, and I always think analytically. So the topic that always made the most sense to me, and I was kind of weird, I guess, that the books that attracted me, I was never a fiction reader. You know, I'm not a Harry Potter guy, but I liked like economics textbooks and stuff like that, and analyzing stats. So I dived into economics, conservative principles, and then from there I've been moving around to more the critical race theory side. So what I've been doing recently is breaking down Ibram X. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So I've done a chapter-by-chapter review, so it's a lot of work that I put into it, but I just finished last chapter, and so I've been talking about that. So I've shifted focus for a little bit there, but generally I mostly comment and stuff from a conservative perspective.
Have you heard of the gentleman, Dr. David Campt?
Campt? No, I don't believe so.
He has a thing called the White Ally Toolkit. And he was on my show. It was a very interesting show. And it was all about this, what his premise is that there's like ghosts in the ether that are, you're implicitly biased and you just don't even know it. And to me, it's just bizarre because how can you fix, quote unquote, somebody who is like racist but doesn't even know it?
Yeah.
Then how do you identify the things to change? You don't even know it's occurring. The whole thing's really bizarre to me.
Yeah. Well, I call it fighting imaginary dragons in your head. That is what these people do from at least their side, is they make up this dragon and they want to be the hero. So they're going to be fighting this thing, whether or not the intentions of the other side are actually racist or really dangerous or evil in any way. It doesn't matter to them. They're going to build this in their head. And that's part of critical theory more generally, is to really attribute certain intentions of other people, whether or not they actually have those intentions, because when they look at the disparate outcomes, they automatically assume you're doing it for an evil purpose. Yeah.
Well, that was one of the arguments that I had with him, disagreements, I guess you would call it. Because he would say they did a study and 90% of the time this happened or whatever. And I was like, but did anybody ask them like why they did something? And he's like, well, that doesn't matter. I'm like, well, of course it matters.
Well,
why somebody did, maybe they had a learned experience from the past.
Yeah. Well, that's Ibram Kendi's redefinition of racism. Racism has nothing to do with racist intent. It is only if the outcomes are racially inequitable, then it must be racist. So if you redefine the term, I mean, as my favorite author Thomas Sowell said, if you redefine the definition of any one word, you can make anything true, any claim true. So if as long as you redefine it enough, yeah, you'll make the claim true.
Mental gymnastics.
Right.
Anyways, so what we were going to talk about, actually, this is completely impromptu, just so everybody knows, because we're recording this on Friday night, and literally, like maybe half hour, 40 minutes ago, something like that, I got the alert on my phone that Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, aka RBG, has passed away at the ripe age of 87, and so I disagree with her pretty much across the board in her political views, and actually the way that she would try to insert her politics into how, because she thought that there should be a revision of the Constitution and this living, breathing document thing, and a bunch of premises that I disagree with. Now, that being said, I give this lady a lot of credit. 87 years old, cancer, and she was still working, and she's a hardworking person. There's no doubt about that. And I hope she rests in peace, and her family has, can mourn their loss and everything like that. All that being said, and I really feel bad for the family. I really do. I don't like when anybody dies, whether I agree with them politically or not. I don't think that she's necessarily a bad person. That being said, if people thought 2020 was crazy earlier today, I give it 24 hours before there is some serious fighting, because if Trump gets another Supreme Court pick, it's going to really shift things, particularly because right now John Roberts is, who knows, with that, he waves like a flag in the wind. So this would really secure the court for a long time, because the other older justices are also liberal, like Breyer and one other one. Can't remember which the other one is. But anyways, yeah. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so everything you basically said right there, I 100% agree with. I disagreed with a lot of her beliefs and what she wanted to change, but she was an inspiration, no doubt, for a lot of especially women who, at a time where they didn't have the access to some of these institutions that they do now, she was able to show women that they can accomplish just about anything. So I think
she was definitely a trailblazer.
Yeah, and there are two very, very unfortunate outcomes that come from this. The first one being a loss of life for someone like that is always awful. Even though I disagreed with her ideas, she wasn't an evil person. That's what I always try to do to the other side. I don't try to attribute evil to people who just think differently than I do. I truly think that they want what's best for whomever they claim they want what's best for. They just have different ideas of how to do it. And I think that the ideas, if they manifest, will not work out in their favor. But there's no doubt that it's sad that she passed away. And then the big thing is, I actually just recorded a podcast with a friend of mine, Truman of Return to Reason, talking about our predictions on November 4th of this year. So the election is November 3rd, and we were talking about November 4th. It's like, we're not going to make any predictions what happens on the 3rd, but we're going to talk about what happens on the 4th. And neither of us really came out with an outcome that ends in nonviolence. Because
there's zero chance of that, I think.
Oh, yeah. And with these mail-in ballots, and they're talking about how the election might not even be decided until possibly January.
Oh, I think that is almost a certainty.
Yeah.
There's actually, I believe that there is a 0% chance that on November 3rd, that either one of them, and people want to say, like, the people on the right or whatever you want to call it, are like, Biden is not going to concede, and he's saying it. Well, he's openly saying it. I'm not convinced that Trump will concede, and I don't know if I blame either one of them, because with the mail-in ballots, we're not going to know, and then it at least goes to December, a minimum into December, but probably if I was betting or somebody had a gun to my head and said you had to pick, it's January. I'm going to say it's not going to be till January till we have some kind of a winner, and even then, I'm not sure it's going to be conclusive or everybody's going to be happy.
This will be fought in the courts for sure, just like the Bush Gore election, but 1,000 times worse because both sides are setting up this election that they say is not going to be valid. So it's going to be the worst case scenario, and that's the worst part of it. And I think there will be a decided kind of victor on November 3rd. There'll be someone who's going to look like they're up in the polls and going to say, if Trump's up in the polls, they'll say it's not close. We got to still wait for these ballots to come in because the mainstream media is just an extended arm of the Democratic Party. So if Biden is ahead and looks like he's going to win, they're going to declare him the effective winner. And then they're going to use that as a baseline to win. If Trump wins down the line, which I wouldn't see happening if it would happen where Biden looks like he's ahead on November 3rd. If Trump wins down the line, they're going to use that as a benchmark to say, okay, he was up here. Obviously, some malicious actions happened between these two times, and they're going to try to declare Trump as an invalid president. So they're setting it up. But when it relates to the RBG thing, it's now there's this huge extra elements to this election that both parties are going to run on. And there's going to be one party that tries to use this type of thing to say, we're fighting for the soul of America. If we can't have even though the founders thought that the judicial branch should be the least powerful branch, it has now effectively become almost the most powerful branch.
No, it is the most. It is the most powerful branch. Sure. I would say.
Yeah, but so this is going to be life and death for them. So if you think they're going to concede or anyone's going to concede in this election, this is the last wrench that need to be thrown in this awful garbage dumpster fire, really, that's going to explode starting November 4th. And then we don't know how long that fire is going to burn.
Yeah. So to put it in perspective, so this is what I think. I think people aren't looking at a couple things, right? Number one, the next oldest justice is Clarence Thomas the oldest conservative, quote unquote, because they're not supposed to be, right?
Right.
The oldest Supreme Court justice appointed by a Republican, let's put it that way, is Clarence Thomas. He's 72. And then the next one is Alito. He's 70, right? That's not very old for Supreme Court justice. Now, on the other hand, Stephen Breyer is 82. So there's going to be a lot of pressure from the left to try to make sure that Trump doesn't get another nomination, because Trump just appointed Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, who are 53 and 55 respectively. So they're young. I mean, they have minimum of 20 years left, right? I mean, this is generational, what we're talking about. So, and John Roberts is only 65. He's not that old, but he is, I don't know, wishy-washy.
Yeah, he's
wishy-washy is, I mean, I'll be generous and say wishy-washy. But so just talking about like long-term, that's going to be the, the fight there. Now, that being said, what really is concerning to me, right, is right now with what's going on, we have, for sure, there's going to be court cases that are going to the Supreme Court, I believe, in reference to shutdown, mask mandates, stuff like that, relevant to the election or to the pandemic, rather. And then you're also going to have court cases that are going to go to the Supreme Court, I am sure, that have to do with voting and the election and mail-in ballots and absentee ballots and all of it, right? And counting and recounting and triple counting and whatever ends up happening after November. And we're not going to have an odd number of justices. And that could potentially be that you have a split decision.
Yeah.
Which could also obviously be problematic.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see a possibility, although I've been hearing the rumblings on social media about Trump trying to push someone through before
Oh no, this is what's going to happen. No, what's going to happen is this is 100% what's going to happen. What's going to happen is he's going to nominate somebody, and they're going to hold on to it. And he's going to do it. It might help him actually if he nominates, depending on who he nominates with his base. I'm
Oh, he'll nominate. I forgot her name.
It's going to be the woman, right? He's going to nominate
she's
a
got
woman.
like 8 kids, and like she's going to be more untouchable than most people. Where she's kind of hits a little bit of the woke check marks that'll kind of give her some defenses.
Yeah, so he's going to nominate her. I forget her name, but I thought he should have done it instead of Kavanaugh.
Amy Barrett or something like that.
Yeah, so he's gonna nominate her, and then what's going to happen is they're going to wait until after the election, and because the Senate they don't switch until January, right? So after the election, they got 2 months to they could still vote. So if Mitch McConnell thinks or they know, and he's another scumbag, but anyways, they're going to know whether the Republicans held the House or the Senate rather, and or if Trump looks like he's really not going to win or whatever. And depending on the circumstances, they'll force a vote. I mean, they'll be able to. And Harry Reid gave them the quote unquote nuclear option to just do a 51 simple majority, and they'll use that if they have to before the inauguration. And there will be some very unhappy Democrats for sure. And I'm not sure if they'll be able to stop that because I'm no constitutional scholar as to how all that works. And, that being said, I'm fairly confident that if they think that they'll either Trump won't win or they'll lose control of the Senate, that they will push that through.
Yeah. Well, if Trump wins and they lose the Senate,
they're going to push
impeach. Well, he'll be impeached. No, let's assume that he remains in office.
Yeah, but it won't matter if they're going to lose the Senate. They're going to try to get that vote done in that lame duck 2 months there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the dynamics at play. They could go for an option that, they'll just kind of let the election slide if they can get enough votes in the Senate and just go for impeachment down the road. I mean, obviously, it'd be nicer to have Biden or effectively, I guess, Harris in office rather than going from Trump to VP or Pence, because then they would have to, which they inevitably would. I guess it would take them about 9 months to figure out a way to impeach him or have him as some sort of accomplice, because they set that up last time that they had Pence as an accomplice in Russiagate. On the last impeachment.
Even if they do, even if they impeach him, they need a supermajority. They're not going to get a supermajority, and so it's going to go nowhere, because it's not going to be legitimate, right? So they're going to need 60 votes, and they're not gaining. Well, what they would need to gain 13 seats, and they're not getting 13 seats in the Senate. I mean, there's no way that's happening.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really looked at the polls in terms of more local elections or Senate elections. The interesting thing is them adding more seats with representation with DC and possibly Puerto Rico. But, that's something way down the road. But, my focus on is really, again, what's going to happen immediately after the election. And this is just another catalyst for this massive explosion that's going to happen when we have both sides set up for an election. They're both going to say that they lost in an invalid fashion. So I just believe that this unfortunate thing that happened with RBG, I'm in the end, I hope she can get replaced with a more conservative justice. Like I believe Amy Coney Barrett, I believe is her name. That would be the one that he'd probably nominate. She was in the running for the last couple. And maybe he actually saved her for a moment like this, because I think she was by far the best out of all 3 of them who have been up so far. But it's just going to create a huge explosion, and that's one of the biggest takeaways from this. And it's going to get more people active. And is that a good thing, bad thing? It really depends on what side you're on, really. And I think it would be a decent strategy for Trump to just kind of lay off another nomination and just kind of play it as, I'm not going to nominate anyone. I'm not going to be able to push anyone through. Let's use this as an election strategy to draw up more support. So I think it's a good possibility there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the Senate map right now of the seats that are open. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. of the 10. This is what they say. What they say, the 10 closest races or whatever, and the close race is only 1, 2, 3, or leaning or whatever.
Mm.
I'm trying to get a list of all of the all the Senate races, because I don't think there's that many Republicans actually up for incumbents that are up for election.
Mm. They have 6-year terms, right?
Yeah, and it's a third of them, so there's 33 up for re-election, but I don't think there's that many.
And then also you got to remember the Republicans who are willing to take Trump down, because that's also a fairly decent base there too. So that's just my concern there. Maybe it's not a likely scenario, but again, the problem we've had before this event that just happened, like you said, like 45 minutes ago, has just multiplied several times. And no matter the political outcome, the social outcomes are not going to be good, because we need to figure out a way to, like I said, I don't see a future where we don't see violence November 4th, and it's not like I'm hoping for it, but we do need to figure out an alternative strategy to tamp down social tensions to at least mitigate some of the damage there. And yeah, I mean, we just got to, again, figure out how to bring this together. And the strategy that I talked about with a friend of mine on the last podcast was exposing the political actors, the people who are purely partisan. I named the last podcast "Banishing the Kids to the Kids Table," because really it's a time now, and we see this with the emergence of this critical theory type stuff that we're seeing, this kind of wokeism, where the kids are kind of running the show, and someone's going to have to voice their opinion and say, hey, this is not time for you guys. You guys are the problem. You guys go back to the kids' table, let the adults talk. Because there's people on the left who are fed up with this stuff too. Because the average voter, the average Democratic voter, is not okay with this type of nonsense. And we're starting to see it more and more now. Like I use my kids as an example. I'm getting emails from my kids that they're going to start teaching anti-racism, is what they call it. That's kind of the buzzword for critical race theory, 1619 revisionist theory type of stuff they're going to be teaching in schools. Luckily, my kids are too young. It starts at 5th grade here, but I'm in a very progressive part of Wisconsin, so there's certainly a good chance it'll be taught in their schools. But it's this type of indoctrination that we need to expose before it becomes more mainstream, because it's already in the mainstream, and that's the big problem. And that revisionist history is only going to add to the fire on November 4th if we can't start to turn the ship now. And that's my big concern.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that something's got to be done, because this what's going on right now is just not, in my opinion, it's not acceptable. I mean, I would consider myself a constitutionalist, and so when you say conservative, it's always interesting to me. Like, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, so conserving the founding principles. So there are fractions of conservatism, and there is kind of that libertarian wing where we don't, we stand up for founding principles until we get pushed enough into a corner, and then we kind of abandon them. And I don't approve of that, but that's kind of like a newer sect of conservatism, just because libertarians were forced to the right wing as of recently with how radical the left wing has gone. And when you talk about liberal is now conservative. They're the same thing. I don't know if you talk to people, or if you listen to people like Dave Rubin, who considers himself what does he call it?
Classical liberal.
Classical liberal, yeah. Which is a conservative now, because conservative just means to conserve something. And liberalism has been left behind by the people driving the bus on the left. So now conservatism has just absorbed liberalism, because they're trying to conserve that. Because in order to have constitutionalism, or whatever you want to call that you would stand for, you have to have a good opposing view and a healthy discourse between the two in order to stay honest. So the conservative movement is really trying to conserve all these different groups and make sure that they remain relevant in the current discourse. And with the fight that conservatives, liberals, even some more moderate progressives are having against the current left wing. You're seeing that conservative party kind of grow, but now it's kind of watering down what conservative means. So conservative can mean just a lot of different things. And
That's why I ask, because it's always interesting to me, because I used to say that I was a conservative, because it's the definition that you gave is a definition that it should be, right? It should be that you're trying to conserve in an American political sense. It should mean that you're trying to conserve the founding, right? And then there's a lot of Republicans who, like establishment Republicans, who consider themselves conservative, but then I look at what they do and how they vote, and I'm trying to figure out what exactly it is that they are allegedly trying to conserve, because it is escaping me. So now I don't call myself that, because I think it's that term, and actually the term liberal, have also been bastardized. I think both of them have been bastardized, because people consider Democrats like liberals, and I think there's a lot of like normal citizens, for lack of a better term, who are Democrats who are just liberal, which is fine. But if you look at who's running the party, that is not liberal in the least.
Well, if you talk about the explicit definition of liberal, I'm a liberal, but we don't run on explicit definitions anymore. It's more of the implicit, or now it's just your team name. Used to be the Washington Redskins, now you're the Washington football team. It doesn't really mean anything anymore, right? Yeah. So it's
if you pull Indians, they don't care about that.
Yeah, right. I'm just waiting for the Chiefs to go down, but yeah, I mean those kind of squishy Republicans. I mean they're, I think of someone like Mitt Romney, very conservative in demeanor, but not conservative politically. I mean, he's really never been very conservative politically. He did all he can to kind of distance himself from the more conservative types of the past, and he has been fairly progressive on some things, but he's got a conservative demeanor. So that's kind of the way they're defining it, I think, with themselves. But they have lost. I think the big problem is conservative. The problem is, especially in government, is conservatives want to add value. Like they understand, especially when they dive into more of the free market principles, which a lot of the founding principles, the free market of ideas, especially, they naturally monetize their ideas. So they go out in the workforce. They don't typically go into government. And the ones that do go into government kind of lose that North Star of understanding what the private industry is like. So they don't mind growing government. I mean, there's this new movement of what they call compassionate conservatism that is willing to use big government to push down their morality, their sense of morality, right?
Well, yep. Their status. That's the problem. The problem is, to me, all this, like, I guess the idea of conservative is a good idea, I guess. But I prefer to use the word liberty, right? Because that's the real fight. The fight is liberty versus tyranny, or liberty versus status. And that's the problem I have with the Republican Party. Because I look around at the Republican Party, particularly of the establishment, like the RNC, these people, just like you said, it's this compassion. It's really bizarre to me, really, because what it is both sides are saying, vote for me because we know what's best for everybody, which is really bizarre. How do you know what's best for 300 million people? And we're going to implement that. So that's why you need to vote for me. Well, that's like collectivism, statism, a bunch of things that I despise. Instead, the message, my opinion, should be vote for me because we're going to limit the government and give you liberty. And that's, I mean, if you look at the word liberal, it is derived from liberty. Yeah. So, it's just, the whole thing's been distorted.
Yeah. To me, it's individualism versus collectivism. I mean, you have these two ideas at odds. Now I would say the modern day left explicitly calls it individualism most of the time as something they want to fight against. I think this rugged individualism just means these people who are born in poverty aren't going to have the tools to lift themselves out. Whereas it's the more free market kind of conservatives understand that market incentives mean that if you are poor, we want you to to pick it up and come with everyone else, because that means we're adding more talent to the talent pool. You can now attribute to the economy a bit more efficiently. And, people falling behind is not advantageous for anyone. And we understand that from an individual sense, but now the collectivist sense means, no, we need to add everyone as a collection, make sure everyone's doing the same. And now you see, again, these kind of critical theory where they look at power imbalances and look at inequities, or really disparities. And they see it as people taking advantage of other people in the zero-sum game, where economics is not a zero-sum game. I mean, you need to add value, you increase value, and it lifts all ships. Whereas collectivism, they say, well, we're lifting all ships the same plane, where in reality, you're just sinking all the ships evenly to the bottom.
Yeah. Well, another thing that is interesting to me when you talk to these like critical theory people, and so they'll point out things that are factually correct, as far as like income and stuff like that. Now you have to start, holding constant for different things, and calculating different variables, and then it becomes a real, hard for them to keep standing on that platform. But I always ask them, like, okay, yeah, there's income disparities, or there's educational disparities, let's say, right? And I'm like, okay, why is that? And they're like, well, the schools are no good. I'm like, why is that?
Yeah.
Well, and because they're not funded enough. And I'm like, well, is it because they're not funded enough? Like, who runs the schools? So anyways, my point is that I always try to get to like, what's the root of the problem? And if you name a problem in society, I can show you how either one of two things: the government has just completely fucked it up, or the government has at least exacerbated the situation. And then to me, that's a pretty obvious, marker that the government shouldn't be less involved, not more.
Yeah, and with the birth of kind of a postmodernism, and that kind of moved itself into critical theory. And critical theory is kind of postmodernism just severed out into different subsets, like critical race theory, queer theory, fat studies, all these different places that focus on different power imbalances in specific areas. What they do is they cut you off the knees right at your first sentence. You say, why are there inequalities? Why are there disparities? Immediately there, they say, okay, I can already see where you're going. You're saying that there is a problem with behavior, because normally it's the underlying behavior. There's some policy that incentivizes or explicitly creates outcomes that are just outcomes from the policy. But most policy, and when you understand kind of free market incentives, you don't see anything as a solution. You only see it as a trade-off. There's no such thing as a solution. There's only trade-offs. There's always a benefit towards something, but normally it's going to trade off as at least leave an opening for a possible negative towards something else. But critical theory cuts it off there, and they say, if you're making an argument that results in that happened with the disparity because of poor behavior by one side, they broaden out that poor behavior to encompass whatever that critical theory is in, so normally race. And they say, if you see disparities in the outcome that Black Americans are not keeping up with white Americans, or they're disproportionately low, then you're saying their behavior is causing them to be there, meaning you think there's something intrinsically wrong with Black people, and then they call you racist. So they cut you off the knees right at the first step.
Well, no, they could say that, but then my answer would be that I don't think they're any less at all. I think that their government has forced them to have bad schools, so they don't have the same opportunity to learn. And it's not that they don't have the capability of it. It's anybody can have. There could be some kid in Africa and living in a mud hut that could be the smartest person in the world, but if he has no access to be taught anything, then it's not going to happen. So, like when I was talking about that Dr. David Camp, we had this discussion. I was like, he was trying to do that, but I was like, no. It has nothing to do with the behavior of the individual or the group of people you're speaking of. I'm concerned with the behavior of education. We actually got into the whole thing about education, and I was like the Department of Education, it's a disaster. It's hurting American kids. And he's like, well, we need guidelines and whatever. And I was like, well, how old are you, sir? He's an older gentleman. And I said, whatever. He said, well, what year did you graduate high school? And he graduated, 60 something. And I was like, oh, great. So you graduated before the Department of Education was ever in existence. And you went and got a doctorate degree. So it seems like the Department of Education didn't hinder, not having that didn't hinder you at all. And then he's like, well, you're more expert in this than I am or something like that. And I told him I was a moron, that I'm not an expert in anything. I just like to use some common sense. So he didn't want to talk about that, obviously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really bizarre to me. The whole thing is bizarre to me. But anyways, getting back on the conservative and liberal, it's interesting to me. Like, I would say that I'm a libertarian. The problem is people have a hard time delineating like big L and little L. And the Libertarian Party is a disaster. So I don't want to associate with that.
What do you think of Jo Jorgensen?
I think that she is a very nice lady who is being ill-advised. And maybe she's been like, like one of the things they were saying is so good about her is like, well, she's been in Libertarian Party politics since 1994 and she's never swayed, right? Because like one of the knocks on Gary Johnson was, oh, he used to be a Republican, whatever. I think she's been in politics too long. Even though she's in the Libertarian Party, she's still involved in politics, right? So there's like this weird politicking going on. And then, then she started saying like, supporting the Black Lives Matter thing. And I don't have any arguments with the phrase Black Lives Matter. Now, when you start talking about the organization, there's a whole other story, right? So, and she was talking about the organization. And then, like I had Spike Cohen on my show, and he's a nice guy, but he's pretty far left libertarian, like open borders and a bunch of other things. So I just think that she's trying to pander too much. It's really weird to me. Like they're trying to pander to like the radical left, when it seems to me like if you would just stick to like legitimately liberty-oriented principles, you could convince a lot of people to vote. And I just think it's a waste of time that the Libertarian Party even runs a presidential candidate, quite honestly. I think the resources could be used much better to try to win like some congressional seats that they could probably win, if they would take that money.
That's where you got to start, as local.
Yeah. And then they say, well, it's to spread the message of the movement. And I'm like, oh, great. Well, another thing you need to do is prove that you can actually win. So how about you go win some congressional districts, right? Well, we have won some local elections. We have some city council and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I understand that. Of course, there's that. Okay, but nobody even knows who their city council is, right? So it's not a big feat. Win some congressional districts. All the money you're spending on George Organ's campaign and that big RV she has and the crew that she has going with her, which you need if you're going to run a presidential campaign, I get it. But I think that's just a big waste of resources for the party. And if they just concerted their efforts to like 5 or so congressional districts and won 3 or 4, maybe 5 of them, which they could, I believe, with proper messaging and everything else. And then you do that next year or in 2 years from now. And then 2 years, you do it again. And then you slowly build this coalition. And then once you like, look, we can win. We got 30 seats in Congress. We got 2 senators, whatever. Then you run for president. And then you might be able to win. You can convince people that you can win. But the way they do it now, and I think it's a waste of money, really, resources. Like, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, so I didn't know much about Jo Jorgensen other than people, normally personal friends, who are upset with the duopoly we have now, posting stuff on Facebook. And so I found it interesting that you mentioned that she was going kind of the BLM route. And I mean, you got to credit to some of these social justice groups with how they're able to use language. Attaching 100%. Themselves to BLM is a great way. I mean, I hate it when people always invoke Orwell, because I think it's overused a little bit. But the reason that he's so effective, and people say, oh, how would he predict all? Well, the dude is an investigative journalist. If you read the Road to Wigan Pier, he is an investigative journalist of his time. He's really good at it. But BLM is a version of newspeak that is just doublethink. It is a word or a phrase used that has 2 different meanings, and you use whichever meanings applicable to your cause at the time. So BLM, the statement, you poll every American and say, do you disagree with the phrase Black Lives Matter? You poll everyone, you round the poll to the nearest whole number, and 0% of Americans disagree with that phrase. Guaranteed.
Yeah.
No one disagrees with it. But it's BLM Inc. It is the alternative to that message that people disagree with, and they ought to. But they can always fight against the same thing with cutting off the knees, saying you are not, you cannot criticize these disparate outcomes because you are now linking to behavior, which links you to race, which makes you a racist. It's the perfect strategy to bulletproof your ideas.
Well, another thing about Jo Jorgensen, She has terrible style. She has the charisma of a gerbil. And there is something about, and I hate to be this way, and people might say it's misogynistic. There's something about the way you carry yourself, the way you look, and the way you act, right? In the 21st century, with technology and video everywhere and everything like that, in 4K, right? You have to present yourself well, and you have to have some charisma. Without that, you are a goner, right? And people might not like this, but it's the truth, particularly for a woman. When she wears the kindergarten, 30-year, tenured kindergarten teacher, long jean dress to her ankles, it's just it's not appealing. It's the bottom line. And that's another problem. Like, people look at her and they're like, I don't know if I could see her running the country.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, as bad as Hillary Clinton dressed, she had custom made dresses that did the most justice possible for her aging body. Just the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
They
Hey,
did.
presentation's just about everything, especially in 2020 when it's all surface level stuff. I mean, it's even their campaigns are all surface level I mean, they're talking points.
Mhm,
That is a surface level argument. They don't get into anything deeper than that.
mhm.
And when you have candidates who've been in government for 40 years, 45 years, like Biden, it doesn't help that he can't recall any of the deeper stuff, the stuff that goes below the surface. But yeah, it's important to present. And like I said, I haven't followed Jo Jorgensen. I've always thought when people started posting her at first, there's something about her face. Like, she looks like Hillary Clinton with a wig. Does she not look like she'd be Hillary Clinton's sister? Like, I thought I was getting duped when I first saw her face. I'm like, y'all don't know that's Hillary Clinton in a wig, right? Like, I don't, and nothing about her policy. I don't know anything about her policy positions other than being a general libertarian. So, I made a joke on the last podcast saying, is there an outcome on November 4th where we don't have violence? And the only thought that came into my head, Jo Jorgensen wins and we all get high. That's the only outcome that does not end in violence. And
And
I don't see that happening.
there's 0% chance that happens.
No, it's not happening.
Yeah. And the thing that saddens me really is that I don't agree with all of her policies, particularly when she starts getting into the social justice thing and whatever. But I do think that our country is in desperate need of small L libertarian constitutional, like the Constitution is a libertarian document, right? So like little L libertarian, like if it was followed, like if we actually went line by line through like all these different mandates and regulations and laws and departments that have been made throughout the years, and you like looked at the Constitution and said, does this fit? Like 90% of it would get cut, right? So my opinion, right? There's a lot of things that don't even need to be in existence on a federal level. Now, on a state level, some completely different. So I think the country's in desperate need of that, desperate need of like states' rights, individual rights, limited government, and less intrusion across the board. I mean, it's really what's going on is I mean, it's far from what the founders, I mean, if you read their writings, like what wanted to happen, right?
Well, they expected the people to not give up, like not just say, okay, I'm responsible for my life, but now it actually seems advantageous to me for the government to be responsible for a little bit of my life. And that's how you get the administrative state growth that we've seen, the Department of freaking anything, which is sad. I mean, the first department that should go is Department of Education. I mean, that should be on the chopping block immediately. But we look at these things as things to be lost rather than things to be gained. I mean, there's a lot of psychological studies that say you don't look at the things that you gain as much as you look at the things you lost. And it's so easy for pushback on the other side to say, if you want to cut Department of Education, it's because you hate the kids, right? So it's such an easy surface level argument to make, and it's going to be so hard to push back that it's probably going to take some consistent terms to actually build public understanding of why it needs to be cut, unless you just show everyone the chart saying, hey, this is all the decline in educational outcomes we're seeing. Maybe public schools are a bad option. So
it's just message wrong, right? So like the left, if you say you want to cut the Department of Education, right? They say you want to hurt kids, and we need a standard and all this, right? And then my response is, well, so what you're telling me is that you believe on an aggregate, parents are too stupid to properly educate their kids at a local level. What you're saying is that you think that parents would accept a local government to improperly administer a school board and improperly educate their children. Is that what you're trying to say? That's how it should, that should be the comeback to that, right? Mm-hmm. Everything has to be the comeback up, in my opinion, to so you're telling me that you don't think people know what's best for them, because who's going to agree to that, right? That's
every administrative agency that gets created, is the government telling the people you are not competent enough to handle this section of your life.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. So, to combat that, to get rid of it, the message should be, well, we think you are competent enough, and rather than send your money to the federal government for then it to be laundered through this agency and then sent back to you, right? The federal government is nothing more than a money laundering operation, right? We send tax dollars federally to the federal government. They launder it. A bunch of people get really rich. Then they send a small portion back to the localities to implement whatever they're going to implement. And I'd rather have it done locally and let people decide what's best to do. I just think that there's poor messaging, and what concerns me is, like we were talking about earlier, with the Republicans, the establishment Republicans. So I don't want to group like the voters in the establishment types, the politicians, these RNC types, these consultants and the strategists, all this other nonsense. All these people that are getting paid, the ones that are making a lot of money, they're statists. They don't want to relinquish that power either. So I think that they're okay with surface level stuff, and they don't want to dig into anything, because if they were to argue their arguments efficiently enough, then they might argue themselves right out of a job.
Yeah. Well, it's that absolute power corrupts absolutely kind of thing. It's like, I claim that I want to use this power to slash all of these administrative agencies, but once I get the power, it's like, all right, I have this small window to implement a bunch of the things that I actually want to do. And now you're sitting there just implementing this stuff, and you're creating a larger government by doing that. I mean, you look at a huge grassroots movement that is extremely successful, the Tea Party movement, extremely successful with getting in, but once they got in, what changed?
The Tea Party movement. No, the Tea Party movement was unsuccessful, in my opinion. It was unsuccessful because it was ran haphazardly. It was very poorly managed. The structure was atrocious. And I don't know.
Do you mean before getting in elected or after?
Yes, before.
Okay.
And this is why, because there was no strategy, right? It was a very good grassroots movement. On a grassroots level, right? But there was no structure to it. For instance, Mitch McConnell is still, figure this one out. Riddle me this. Mitch McConnell is still a part of the unofficial, like the Congress has much more caucuses because there's more people. The Senate has less, right? So there's an unofficial Tea Party caucus in the Senate, and it's like him, I think Rand Paul, Ted Cruz. There's a couple guys in there, right? And Mitch McConnell is one of them. Riddle me that. Why hasn't anybody ever, right? Because Mitch McConnell's been this way for decades now, right? Why was he ever allowed to attach his name to that? Ever. Why was he ever allowed to attach his name to that? Marco Rubio is another great one. Why was he ever allowed? Listen, people knew how he was before he was running for the U.S. Senate, right? He had a track record of being shyster in local politics before he ran for the Senate. Nobody vetted him. Nobody said, no, you cannot bandwagon if you're not with our principles, you can't come here and try to get votes from us. That never happened. So I think they did a good job of rallying people to get people elected. Now, I'm not convinced, based on the outcomes and what happened, that the people who implemented this really wanted those things, or they were just pulling at people's heartstrings, and touching pain points, or if it was just poorly ran. I'm going with the poorly ran because that I don't want to put malice on anybody if I don't know. But it has to be one of those two things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I heard.
I would
Go ahead.
I would say they were organized in getting people in. So yeah, in terms of vetting, obviously my gripe with them was you got their foot in the door, and then what did they do after they got their foot in the door? They didn't do
No follow-up.
what you ran on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But it's a good example of a grassroots movement, how to actually assemble. And I think the Libertarian Party could probably learn something from that.
Well, I think anybody can learn something from that. And another thing was I was listening to a podcast that I can't remember his name, Michael Johns or something like that. He was like the spokesperson and one of the founders. And he was talking recently about why it was a success and why it failed and how it could be done again and whatever. And he was talking this story, and he was admitting some of the lack of continuity and how he went to New York to try to campaign for some gubernatorial candidate, and he was meeting with some local Tea Party chapters or whatever you want to call them, and there was 3 in this one area, and I don't know what it was, it wasn't New York City, but it was Syracuse or another decent sized city. Mm-hmm. And they had 3 groups of 100. And why don't you guys get together? Oh, well, we don't like them because of this, and we don't like them because of this, whatever, right? Petty stuff. So there was the lack of continuity there, number one. And then number 2, more importantly, I'm thinking to myself, although trying to get a Republican elected in New York is a good long-term goal, I'm not sure at that time that is a good use of your time as a national spokesperson, or whatever money that you were spending, because you obviously flew there and put up in a hotel and ate, whatever else, right? And not that I'm against spending money for stuff like that. Obviously, those accommodations have to be made. But why are you spending that money to go campaign or do whatever you were going to do for some gubernatorial Republican in New York? The bottom line is that guy's not going to win. So why weren't the same problem with the Libertarian Party? Why are you not effectively using your resources? I get it. It's a good idea to have a national grassroots thing going on, and that's cool. And you can let those local chapters do what they're going to do, and you should support them in any way you can with materials and ideas and whatever you can do. But if you're talking about the national spokesperson, he shouldn't be going to New York to campaign. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, Maybe I'm crazy, but I just think that's a complete waste of resources. So, there was a bunch of problems there, and we'll see what happens in the future. But I think that it was a really good grassroots movement, but they didn't keep the momentum. And part of the reason they didn't keep the momentum is because the people that got elected in those seats didn't keep their promises. Mm. And the one that I know that did, Colonel Allen West, he got gerrymandered out of a district by the Republican Party. How coincidental.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think these are the large effects of having a huge, overpowering government that it just gives you too much power when you actually have the power there. To give it away is some of the hardest things to do. But we need to certainly start to vet and figure out who can go in there and actually stick with or be fine with bailing out and saying, okay, I know this is going to be a self-destructive move effectively. There's a good chance I get the boot after this one, which is kind of, I see that's how kind of a presidential second term goes, where you don't have to worry about getting reelected and you can actually accomplish some of the things you do, which is kind of what I hope Trump does. I hope when he gets reelected, he will actually follow through on one big thing that I think he'd do day one would be calling, although it would be a hard PR move, would be calling Antifa a domestic terrorist organization so they can start defunding. They're bailing everyone out and stuff like that. But it's hard when you have that power and you say, all right, I have the small window to do something good. do I just relinquish the power immediately, or do I try to get some stuff passed before my time's gone?
Well, see, I might disagree with that a little bit because I think that the Tea Party, they had such a strong grassroots movement, right? It could have been a good way to like subvert the establishment Republicans and be like, listen, our guys are going to vote for liberty and fiscal responsibility and, less intrusive spying on the entire country. How about, that'd be a good place to start.
Right.
Um, and say, listen, we're going to have this grassroots movement. We're going to keep ourselves loyal and we're going to hold the people that we helped get elected accountable, right? Because I don't know why the presumption would be that if they didn't go along with the party line, right? They were able to go after Allen West because he was in a real tough district for him to even win to begin with, right here in South Florida, a really difficult, and then they just redistrict them out of it. But you can redistrict one guy because he stayed true and he didn't fold to the party, the party politics. He did what he thought was right. But when there's only one person doing that, that's tough, right? But you can't redistrict all of those people, right? That was a huge wave that happened. And they could have used that to say, listen, we're going to fundraise on our own and we're not going to ask the RNC for money when we're campaigning. If you want to give us money, that's fine, but it's not going to be some quid pro quo like, well, you got to vote this way. If not, we're going to run somebody in the primary against you. Good luck. You know what I mean? And so I think they could have took this movement that they had. They had a lot of people. I mean, you saw those Tea Party rallies. They had a lot of people and a lot of support. And if they could have garnered that and they could have cultivated that, they could have drove real change, long-term change. And they didn't. They squandered it.
Yeah. So what do you think of the idea? Because I'm in some Facebook groups. I always talk about them on my podcast. What I now call the Lincoln Project conservative, the anti-Trump conservative. Like I have my gripes with Trump. I am not. You never catch me dead in a MAGA hat. That's just not my thing. To me, it's a bit too like treating him like an idol. To me, it's just too uncomfortable. But as someone who's probably going to reluctantly vote for him, or not so reluctantly vote for him in 2020, like what do you think of the argument as someone who's open to voting libertarian? At least what it sounds like, to breaking the duopoly, to breaking the voting for the shiniest turd kind of thing, where you're like you're voting against somebody, not voting for anyone. What do you think? Do you think that's a bad thing even, or do you?
I think it's an atrocious thing. Well, it's weird, right? So you're always going to vote, in my opinion, for the lesser of the evils, right? Because unless you're the candidate, you can't possibly agree with everybody on or any one person. Like, I think we agree on a lot of things, but I'm sure if we got down to like, the nitty gritty, we're not going to agree on everything, right? So I don't think, obviously there might be some people that you're like, this person is like doppelganger or something, right? We have like some telepathic thing going on. But for the most part, you're going to vote for the lesser of whatever, how many ever evils, in the sense of they're not going to align completely with you. Now, that being said, like I'm going to vote for Trump, right? Joe Jorgensen doesn't have a chance. I live in a swing state. I'm going to vote for Trump unless something crazy happens, right? There's always a caveat there, like
right.
Something crazy could happen, right? So unless something really bizarre happens, and the problem is that he's better than Joe Biden, but Joe Biden, the bar that he set is, I mean, a crippled pony could jump over it. You know what I mean? So that's a problem. And in my opinion, I don't think that the federal government, the federally elected positions, Congress or the presidency, and that the House of Representatives or the Senate and the president, they should not even be a partisan. It shouldn't even be a partisan race. The job of those individuals is to protect and preserve the Constitution. Now, that doesn't seem to me to be a partisan thing. Now, you start getting to the state level and local levels, then it's different, right? Because I think there should be freedom there to govern yourself accordingly. In my utopia, it would be more so at the local level, as local as possible. And then so that way, if it'd be much easier to move somewhere if you weren't happy with what's going on in the city you lived in. It's much easier to move to a city or two over than it is to move to a whole nother state, or at this point with how it's working, you have to leave the country essentially, right. And to get away from these sweeping regulations. So I think that the two-party system is atrocious. I don't think it even should be in existence. I think we should have, instead of having primaries and then a general election, I think it should be 3 votes, right? So you add 1 polling time, and you have the first one is just whoever can run, and they can get, and then you get the top 4 out of that, right? And then those 4 run, and then you get the top 2. And then maybe put like some threshold for percentages or something. I'm not sure. I haven't completely fleshed it out. But you go from as many to 4, and obviously have some requirements, that you have to meet, like some fundraising or something. Yeah. And then you get to 4, and then you could boil it down the second time around, boil it down to 2, and then you have somebody who wins after that. So
you're kind of talking about like a large primary kind of thing, but without parties, right?
Yeah, without parties. So you get, and to me, the idea is that you have 10, 12 people that are going to run, right? Who make the cut to get onto this first ballot. And then from those 8 to 12 or whatever it is, then you have, and maybe you could say, well, maximum we have is 12 or 10 or whatever it is, and you have to meet whatever requirements, and then, so then you get down to 4, right? So there's going to be some people who voted for different people than the top 4, right? So then those people are going to shift around their votes, and then you're going to get to the top 2. And then whoever is, will win that election. And then I think that way you could get out of this 2-party, this weird, bizarre thing, that Iowa and New Hampshire, like, start dictating who's like the front runner. Really, like, nothing against New Hampshire or Iowa, but I mean, is that really the pulse of the country? And then this way you can just get rid of this duopoly, and people just vote for who they think is best.
Yeah. I mean, to me, I never had anything against duopoly. I think the infighting is a great thing. I think the natural inefficiencies in government are a good thing. At least the federal government are a good thing. But the caveat in there is they were never meant to be this big. And the founders made it of checks and balances. They made it extremely inefficient without the vision that the people would be like, yeah, let's just keep growing this thing, keep growing this monster because I want less liberty. I'm going to trade it for some security, right? So
perceived security.
Right. But, they never envisioned that the people would be willing to do that. So, when it comes to stuff like government shutdowns, every day the government shutdown is a good day to me. I guess that throws me on the more libertarian side of conservatism. But, I love the gridlock, and normally the duopoly, I think, works in our favor, and that it seems like nothing gets done as long as they're in there. But the problem is the Republican and Democrats are not as different as they advertise themselves to be. And you can see that with growing government. You can see that with budgets going out of control. So to get another serious player in there, I think would be extremely healthy to start, or at least severing off, let's say Republicans start severing off the actual conservatives and McConnell type Republicans. They start separating a bit more. But I agree with you there that it has some atrocious outcomes.
Are you're a free market kind of guy? Seems like.
Yep.
Now, in the free market, what does competition breed?
Normally, better prices for goods that people want.
Just more
efficiencies, yeah.
Now, so if we had more competition in the political spectrum, right? That's how I look at it. I just don't like the duopoly because I think the idea that Americans have 2 choices to pick from is it's bizarre to me. Mm-hmm. Like there's just not enough different views. And I think if you had more choices, it would force coalitions to be made to get anything passed, right? So number one, less things would get done, which in my opinion should be the amount of legislation that gets passed federally is really blows my mind, right? Like, I don't know why they're always voting for things. It's 2020. You could fly to DC like once a month and vote on hopefully nothing, and then go back home. Like, they're there all the time. It's really, the whole thing is bizarre. But if you had to force coalitions, that would naturally just kind of stop, right? Because it'd be harder to get coalitions to agree to something. But then if you had to get a coalition, that would mean that a lot of America was down. It would be more than 50%. Way more than 50% would be like, yeah, I'm down with this. And this is what we need. This is what we want. And I think the biggest problem, more so than the duopoly, actually, is the party system, as in like that the DNC and the RNC hold so much power.
Do you think that's a problem with private money flowing in? Like, what do you think of allowing or not allowing private money or super PACs and getting all this money into politics? What do you think about that?
I think that I'm okay with money going into politics, private money going into politics. I do think it's bizarre, though, that they put a limit on individuals, but really they don't put a limit on individuals, because then they just give it to super PAC, and it's like, what are they constraining? Right? Nothing. Nothing's being constrained, right? So like, it's just it's a weird system where you can only give $5,500 or $11,000 if you're a couple, and I think that's what it is.
Probably like 2,500 or something like that for a single person, the individual.
Whatever it is, but you can give 25 million to a super PAC, and then that super PAC is just going to support the candidate you want. So like, what are they really? They're not doing anything, right? And then of course the PACs work with the candidates. They say they don't, but of course they do. So like, the whole thing is bizarre to me, because it's just it's a false sense of like, these people aren't contributing or whatever. Now I do believe in this. So the presidential race is a little weird because it's a national election, but I do believe that if you're running for the Senate in Florida or wherever you're at, that you should only be able to fundraise from people who live within your state. Likewise, if you're in a congressional district, you should only be able to fundraise from people who live with people that you actually represent.
So no funding from the RNC, DNC. So you're cutting off funding there. Yeah,
that's what happened. I know this. I don't know how long you've been doing your podcast. I know this. I've met people who are running for Congress and doing my podcast, and I've talked to them privately, and I won't name who they are. Some who've been on my show, some who haven't been on my show, actually, who we still talk, and for scheduling reasons or whatever, it didn't work out. That the RNC, they're running either against other primary candidates, or they're running against an incumbent in the primary, and they're not the chosen one, right? So they're getting jerked around, or we're getting jerked around or whatever. And to me, that's a problem. To me, that's a big problem.
Yeah. So I'm assuming you're not a big Bernie fan.
No,
if I can guess that. What do you think about the DNC? What they did to Bernie? I guess twice now, two presidential elections in a row. You talk about the sway of the DNC. I mean, that's a pretty good example of it right there.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I actually don't mind too much what they did to Bernie Sanders, because he's not even a Republican, a Democrat.
Yeah, definitely not a Republican. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely not a Republican. He's not a Democrat either, right? He's a socialist. Yeah. Now, he did a good job of hijacking the party. I'll give him credit there.
He's still an independent, technically, I believe.
Yeah, he just runs as a Democrat because he knows that he has to run as a Democrat for presidential race reasons, which also goes to show you that there's another problem there, right?
Yep.
In the two-party system, this is another thing, right? So much money is spent on federal elections that people don't even know a lot of the times who their congressperson is, right? They just know Trump or Biden or Hillary, Trump, Obama, McCain, whatever, right? That's all they really know. A lot of people. It's alarming, actually. And so they get inundated with these ads and whatever. And they end up voting down ballot. And sometimes it has to do with, energizing the base and getting people out to vote. And this is why in presidential years, often Congress or the House of Representatives swings with whoever's the president, because these people are voting like just down ballot. It's the same, like up until COVID, you ask somebody who's their mayor, they don't know who's their mayor, the city council, they have no idea. They're just voting right down the line, And that's another problem with it, right? There's so much money being spent on these federal elections for a position in the presidency who realistically does not have very much power at all.
Should not, yeah.
And like constitutionally. I actually had an argument with somebody on Instagram on a post that I made that, like, Congress is much more important than the presidency. These are equal branches of government. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, dude, read the Constitution. Oh, because this, and I was like, all right, so listen, if the president signs an executive order, most of which they have no business doing, Congress can just defund those orders and say that we're not going to fund that, making them pretty much useless. Now, on the other hand, if Congress signs legislation and the president tries to veto it, they can override the president. Congress definitely has more power. The power of the purse is the most powerful tool anywhere, right? So the president, Congress can nullify a president. There's no doubt about it. They can make him useless, essentially. Anytime they do something that he doesn't like, they can go have a session and defund whatever he tries to do. So, and without any money, then what are you going to do? You can't do anything. So, Congress is much more important. The problem is there's this weird misconception of most people that the president has all this power that I would argue that they shouldn't have and don't have, and it's not legitimate. And there's just so many people that don't know that. Like, I hope I see the day that it's like, who's running for president this year? Oh, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Like, that's what I want.
Yeah, I've referred to the president as a glorified postman, effectively, or that's kind of what it should be. But yeah, you're right. Because it's turned into a popularity contest, they see it as the guy. Really the guy driving the bus, and it's really sad that that's looked at like that. Switching gears a little bit, because this is somewhat recent news, San Francisco, though they've tried it before, is trying to lower the voting age to 16, and it looks like they actually might be successful this time. I guess more generally, when people talk about the percentage of people who actually vote, it was like 40% or something like that.
Well, how many voted last time? Like 120, 130 million. Sorry.
Yeah.
So that's
a third.
About a third. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not necessarily eligible voters. Yeah. So I want to say it ends up around 40-something%, right? And people always say, oh, yeah, whatever, you shouldn't do that. To me, not voting is a vote in and of itself. Personally,
that's why I have a problem I have with Ben Shapiro.
Yeah. Well, I listen to Ben a lot, and I don't know, maybe you have a specific reason why for it, but I guess I want to say he said this before, but my view on it is, if I hear you say something and it's kind of ignorant and you're voting for someone just because you saw their commercial on YouTube or advertisement on YouTube, I'd rather have you not vote. I'm not going to tell you can't, but I'd rather have an uninformed voter sit at home than vote based on something they saw on an advertisement or a yard sign or something like that.
The problem I had with I have a lot of problems with Ben Shapiro, quite honestly. But the main one is he was pushing this idea that, well, I'm not going to vote for Trump. I'm not going to vote for Hillary. I'm not going to vote for anybody. Well, that's easy for him to say when he lives in California, right? If he lived in a swing state, he'd probably have a different tune, number one. Number two is he was giving this rhetoric. And by saying that, I'm not going to vote for either one because neither one of them is a good choice based on whatever moral high ground he was standing on, which is not very, it's like a little bucket. But actually, it might have been a tall bucket for him. But anyways, you're saying that's a no vote is a vote for the other person, kind of, right? And how many people, young kids, impressionable kids, listen to him?
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so saying that you're not going to vote is saying that you're okay with, at the time, Hillary getting elected, right? Now, he's kind of changed his tune, actually a lot, which is I don't know, interesting because Trump hasn't really changed his tune, and he's been doing kind of what he said within, what he's been able to do with his, fighting with both parties, honestly, from the start of his tenure. Trump hasn't really swayed too much off of his rhetoric, but Ben Shapiro has changed a lot, which is interesting to me. Like, if you were so, adamant then, why wouldn't you be so adamant now? But the point is he was saying that he would be okay with Hillary winning, right? And if he was just some Joe Blow or whatever, it wouldn't bother me as much. The problem is he literally has millions of young, impressionable kids that listen to his show. Now, I'm not sure if he could have eclipsed that, with him just saying that I'm going to vote for Trump or whatever. And not that he has to be a cheerleader for Trump, but man, he thought Hillary would have been okay to win, right? I mean, I don't know. So I didn't like it. And there's a bunch of other things we don't have to get into. But yeah. That premise I don't like, right? Like, so you're saying that you're okay with Hillary winning, and you have a bunch of young, impressionable kids that listen to your show, a large, astronomical reach, and there's no doubt in my mind that there's kids that did not vote because of what he said.
Yeah, just on that topic, I normally don't like the if you don't vote, you're effectively voting for the other person defense. It's not just because you can flip that around, and actually one of the reasons, one of my pushbacks against Ben Shapiro is his saying if facts don't care about your feelings, where you can just reverse that and say my feelings don't care about your facts, and it's actually just an equally valid point. It's just going the opposite direction. So to me, I don't mind people not voting. To me, it's the same thing as people listening to Pod Save America and deciding not to vote for the other guy, and they say effectively you're letting Trump win. So again, I'm totally okay with people not voting, but I can be used as an example as someone in 2016 who did not vote for Trump. Although I did not vote for Hillary either, that I've completely changed my tune on that. And the reason I didn't vote for him is because I was just so skeptical of what he was saying. Was he going to follow through with it when he actually got in the office? And I found that he has followed through with it. There's some stuff on economics that I'm not very happy of, but the number one thing with Trump is his pushback on the media, which I think is the single most important thing he's accomplished, is hopefully exposing them. I don't know how well it's working with people who are not already predisposed to a more conservative mindset, but I think that is something extremely important, and hopefully he can keep that momentum moving. But going back to the kind of how I started the question, San Francisco loading the voting age to 16, or even expand that out if they were able to generally. I don't even know if you could do this at a federal level to lower the voting age to 16. What do you think about that?
I think it's a terrible idea. 16-year-old kids have no idea how to tie their shoes, barely. I think actually the voting age should be raised.
That was going to be a follow-up question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it should be raised. And I have an argument that I think, and this is something I really this is not even like just me trying to be funny. I legitimately believe this, that we have this idea of no taxation without representation, right? Well, if there's no taxation without representation, there should also be no representation without taxation. So if you do not contribute in the form of taxes, considering that we have taxes, which I don't even think we should have federal taxes. We did not have them for a long time, and we operated our country just fine. And without the big, monstrous federal government, we wouldn't need them. But that being said, if we do have them, and I have to pay a lot of money in taxes, then I don't think it's fair that somebody who doesn't pay taxes, or who conversely lives off of my taxes, i.e. politicians, to be included in this, that you should be able to also have the same representation. If you're not contributing, then why do you get a say? And then there would be some arguments about, they're still contributing. Well, not really, because trust me, they don't want to see my tax bill. I promise you that. And not that I make a lot of money. There's just a lot of federal taxes.
Right.
I live in a no tax state for a reason. I'm spoiled. I would never live in a state that has state income tax. I could never do it. And federal taxes are, I mean, I was talking to a gentleman the other day who has done very well for himself, and he lives in a nice life, and he used to live in New York, and now he moved down to Florida. And I was like, well, I can tell by the house that you live in, sir, not to intrude, but because we were talking about taxes.
Yep.
And he's like, there's 10% income tax in New York. And I was like, well, so I'm looking at his house, I'm like, well, I can tell, I'm not trying to intrude, but I can tell that by this house that you were in the top tax bracket in income federally. And then, so if you had 10% on top of that, you're paying basically half of your income in taxes. And he said, oh yeah, the running joke that I have is that my favorite day of the year is June 15th, because then I start working for myself.
That was a good one.
Imagine that. You imagine the first half of the year, everything that you make essentially goes to the government.
Yeah. Well, I can say as someone who had to work out of Chicago for a while, it's certainly not as fun. Paying into a system that I mean, to me, it's more frustrating when you pay, if I had to pay income tax on, I pay income tax in Wisconsin. Our government is not quite as left-leaning. If I were in some place like New York or California, I'd be extremely frustrated just because I know my tax dollars are funding some of the worst ideas out there. But I agree with you there that 16, obviously the voting age would be way too low. I like, I don't know if you listen to Joe Rogan at all, but his kind of opinion on this, I think he believes it should be like 25 when you're the two sides of your brain actually fuse together and you can actually do a bit better risk assessment. Makes more sense. But to reduce it based on your taxes, I can only imagine there'd be some sort of civil rights law that would prevent that from happening. Just because I can see how people would make the argument. One, people on disability, that's a bit more difficult. And two, they would make it a race issue, of course, if there's a higher...
I can change it. I'll alter my statement. I'll alter it so I can fend off all of those things, right?
Yeah.
You have to, at some point in your life, for one full fiscal year, pay taxes, federal taxes. So this way, if you have paid taxes and you go on disability, then fine, by all means, then you can be a part of the system. But the idea that, because this is what bothers me, right? We have 18-year-old kids, never done a thing in their life, and they're in college, still never done a thing in their life, never worked a day, never done anything. And then they want to vote for somebody who says, well, we're going to pay for your free college for all. Well, no, I paid my way through college. I didn't get any loans. Like, is somebody going to reimburse my tuition? Like, if this ever happened and they forgave all student loans, I'd be pissed because I'm like, I'm a dummy. Yeah. I should have racked up $200,000 of student loans and went on Cancun trips for spring break and everything else, with that money that was supposed to be for college, right? Yeah. And then had it forgiven.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat there. That's something that would make me infuriated if they do even loan forgiveness and how they would play that out, because that's almost like the reparations game where it's like, who do you pay? What happens if they already paid it off? And that would open up a whole new can of worms that would be awful and devastating and infuriating for a whole bunch of people. And that'd be a great way to separate the country a little bit more on that one. But I do my best prediction with just the American university system is going to see a major change, because it's going to have to, because either you're going to have to make free education, which is awful, because I would argue, like, I went to an engineering school, so my school is actually pretty helpful in preparing people for the real world. But I would say the average person who's not doing a STEM field major is going to come out of college much less prepared for the real world than they went in. You can see because these indoctrination classes that they're playing now. Yeah.
Oh, that was me.
What major did you have, if you don't mind me asking?
Business management.
Nice.
And marketing. And I didn't learn a fucking thing. The couple things that I learned was in some finance classes, but it was really more like personal finances. Like, so how compound interest work. And I already had an idea, but it was a little more in depth, and like some money in banking and how does the banking system work and stuff like that, which I guess would have some small, minute utility in the business world. But it really just helped me, like, personally, But like, I was taking marketing classes, and it has nothing. The number one is they're just not very good teachers, quite honestly. And then number two, like, everything's outdated. Everything changes so fast that by the time you get the book written, it's null.
Well, that's part of the racket, though.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah.
The book racket is another whole thing that we can get on about college.
Yeah.
Do you have kids?
Yeah, 2. 3rd grade and 2nd grade.
Oh, so they're a little older than my kids. Yeah. So, and I believe this too with your kids. They're still young enough. Mine are 3 and 5. And I think by the time my kids get in school, the idea that you're going to go to college for something outside of a STEM field is going to be laughable.
Oh, yeah.
Like, nobody's going to do it.
Yep. Yeah. No, I've always, even my fiance who's going to school for nursing, I'm like, man, just watch some YouTube videos. You'll learn how to put it in an IV just fine. But yeah, even with someone who actually would be able to get an education, actually apply the education to something, I'm still like, man, the institution, the American university institution, I think will go through a radical change within the next decade, and hopefully it'll be good, not so bad. But I mean, you're flooding the market with all of these majors that don't apply, cannot possibly apply to real life. I mean, there's majors out there that it's like, if you're talking about African studies, the only thing you can do with that is teach African studies.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a circular logic that all you're going to do is teach more people to teach other people the same thing. And there's no value to the market it actually brings. Like, whatever. If you want to do an African studies class, although I do think those are, they're a subset of critical theory normally, but if you want to take one of those as an elective, whatever, but like majors in this stuff, you got to use common sense there. There's no application to the real world.
What's going to happen is, even with like business degrees and all this other horse shit that's sold to people that's really useless, you don't learn anything. And then you go to the workforce, you realize you know nothing. And then you learn everything while you're there. And so what's going to happen is, and it's so expensive, and what are all these different factors. Companies are realizing that they're getting kids who are out of college and don't know anything. So they're just going to get younger kids who they can pay a little bit less, and then they're going to groom them properly to run a business or do whatever it is outside of things like engineering, where you need to know, like, okay, there's this calculation so that way this building doesn't collapse on somebody, and we need to make sure you're proficient, or, medicine, like a doctor, and you're doing surgery, science, like those STEM fields, which I believe actually do need some form of like upper level education that you could learn on the job, but it would just be too difficult, I think.
Well, I would say this is an engineer who's hired other engineers. The best engineers are the ones who never went to school. They're like 50 years old, and they've just been through the ringer of all these different things. They're always the best because they can apply real things where the conceptual sometimes does not help in reality. But yeah, it's something you don't want to get rid of that institution. I certainly don't want a doctor who's just kind of guessed and checked his way to being an efficient doctor, because it's a bit scary in the early stages.
Yeah, exactly. I don't need the test subject.
Yeah.
Anyways, Kevin, we got to wrap it up. Thank you again for being on the show, and let everyone know how they can follow you.
Yeah, so you can follow me on engineering or ENG_politics on Twitter, engineering politics on Parler. I'm also on ThinkSpot, which is it was basically started by Dr. Jordan Peterson, or helped started there. But you can look me up on there, engineering politics. But my biggest, and YouTube engineering politics, but my biggest following community is going to be something called locals.com. So it's going to be engineeringpolitics.locals.com. And that's where you actually can build your own communities. I host all my content there. Also, I have bonus content there as well if you want to support the community. And those are the best places to find me.
Perfect. Thank you again, man. That's a wrap.
Yeah. Pleasure talking to you, man. All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Make sure to check out more episodes of the Slightly Sophisticated podcast and show Kyle some support. You can also find Kyle and support his podcast on YouTube and Instagram. You can give direct support on Patreon by searching Kyle Ramos. He also has a website, slightly sophisticatedpodcast.com. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I want to take a quick moment to share different ways you can help support this content. There are a few easy ways to do this. You can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics. You can give me a follow on Parler at Engineering Politics. You can also join the Facebook group named Engineering Politics, where I share and discuss content with the Facebook community. You can subscribe to my video channel on YouTube under the channel name Engineering Politics, where you can find the video version of each podcast. I'm also active on ThinkSpot, which is a discourse-generating application that promotes intelligent and honest conversations while discouraging the trolling and nonsense found on most social media platforms. You can find all my podcasts and videos on there as well. And now there is a new donation feature on my ThinkSpot page for those of you who follow me on there and want to support this content. But the best way to interact with me, get my newest content, and support this podcast is the Engineering Politics Locals community. This is an amazing community that goes far beyond just a membership platform intermediary for creators. It allows the followers of this content to get together and discuss the newest articles, podcasts, and videos all in one place. I strongly urge you to join the Engineering Politics Locals community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You can become a member for free, and now you can get a 3-month free trial when becoming a subscriber if you use promo code EPFREE. That's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I would love to have your support with your subscription so this content can remain independent and keep growing. Monthly subscriptions to the Engineering Politics Locals community start as low as $2 per month. I hope I can count on your support so I can start making higher quality podcasts and subscriber content. I appreciate your consideration. Let's build a community together. Thanks for listening. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. None of the persons, podcasts, books, or other references other than engineering politics used in this work directly reflect my ideas and/or personal beliefs, nor should they be held accountable for anything said during this podcast. Thank you for listening.